Okay, this is mini lecture 5. It's the final lecture for Module 6. And in this, I just briefly want to talk about the population issues in Asia. It's often one of those things that people hear. The populations of India and China are both well over 1 billion people. And that's a significant number. That means that 2/5 of the world's population, at this point, roughly 2/5 of the world's population lives in this region. When we talk about that, what we have to understand is that this has to do both with historical trends and to some degree with population policies. We also have to relate the total population as well as population change to development in countries and to the impact on the environment. Okay, so it's a wonderful graphic, and it's one of those that when you find this kind of thing, you really want to use it to think about what it means. There are more people living in the circle that I've shown here than there are in the rest of the world. So if you'll notice that circle encompasses China, Japan, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Malaysia, and in that circle, more people exist there than the rest of the world combined. That means that population pressures are really significant in this area. Another way of seeing this, and I kind of like these maps, this is what is called the world at night map. And what it does is it shows, in a sense, the impact of people in one way. This is energy consumption. And one of the things that I want to point out, I'm just going to kind of move the arrow over here. This is the East African area, and this is part of the Arabian Peninsula, if you can't see where we are. But you'll notice in this part of East Africa, there's very little light, which means there's very little electrification. In contrast, when you look at eastern part of China, Japan, you see incredibly bright, brilliant use of energy. And so again, people mean energy consumption most of the time. An interesting exception to this is a detail of this, and it shows the Korean Peninsula. And it's one of those just profound images. This is the demilitarized zone here, South Korea here. Incredible amount of energy used and a huge amount of light used at night. And then this is North Korea. And again, North Korea, because of many of the embargoes, many of the constraints that have been put on that country, has very little in terms of energy resources and is in fact very frugal in its use of energy. And that also means that if we think about population, one person is not one person in terms of their impacts on the environment and their impacts on the economy. Now, populations change. It is important to understand that some parts of the world, especially in Asia, are going to grow and others are, in a sense, kind of stabilizing. And this is the one that I want to focus on right now. You notice Tokyo as kind of a mega city, largest city in the world at this point. But you'll notice that the blue on the outside, that's how much growth there's going to be in a 25-year period. In Japan's major city, Tokyo, is almost not going to grow at all in that 25-year period. Less than 5% growth in all likelihood. Now compare that to, for example, New Delhi or Karachi, where you're going to see in a 25-year period 43% growth. That means that city's going to grow half again in a 25-year period. That rate of growth, of fertility, and of migration, and remember that oftentimes we think of just natural growth of population, but remember, people move too. That spells a lot of problems for these cities. When you grow that rapidly, your infrastructure has a difficult time keeping up with it. Now, this is a very brutal way of understanding that implication. This is President Modi of India has identified as one of his major concerns this issue. And this is, again, it's one of those terrible maps, but it really makes a point that's important. This is the proportion of the population in each of the districts in India that defecates in the open, that is, does not use a toilet. And what you'll notice is that in parts of India, that number approaches 90%. That's an infrastructural issue. It is not a cultural issue, it is an infrastructural issue. If you do not have sewer systems, if you do not have public toilets, if you do not have running water in houses, then you have this type of problem. And human waste is a serious environmental issue and health issue. And so India struggles as their population is growing rapidly. And in the case of India, it's growing in this case because of very high total fertility rates. The infrastructure, including sanitation, simply cannot keep up with it. Now, what we can see though is that in some respects, population and poverty have begun to change significantly. This is a map of what they call the center of global poverty. And if we went back to 1981, the center of global poverty would in fact be Asia. That is because at that time, a significant portion of the Chinese population and a significant portion of the Indian population lived well below the global poverty line, that is $2 a day. But China has dramatically changed in the last 25 to 30 years. The percent of its population that is below the poverty line has dropped dramatically. India has not been quite as successful, but is still moving in that direction. And so what has happened over time is that the center of poverty has moved dramatically towards Africa. So South Asia, while it has a very, very large population, it doesn't have as rapidly growing a population. Both India and China have dealt with, in different ways, their population growth rates. China's is very close to approaching zero. India's is not quite that good, but is slowing dramatically. Whereas in some parts of Africa, the population is growing rapidly, and again, infrastructure and employment are not keeping pace. So, again, the issue of poverty, the issue of population growth. As you read the chapter, you'll notice that both India and China, the issues of how they've dealt with their poverty and how they've dealt with their population are intertwined. Again, make sure you finish your readings before you take the quiz. We'll see you in the final lecture.